I never remove stitches myself. It takes time, the kids are squirmy, it hurts them. Sometimes they yell, even cry. They never, ever like it. In fact, they fear it the way they fear shots. It's the most common question I get from kids before surgery. Will the stitches hurt? So I just don't do it. I'm a brain surgeon. I've got brain surgeon stuff to do. I have someone else from my clinic come in and remove them at the 2-week post-op check. Then, if I'm in clinic or nearby, I can pop my head in the room and check on things once everything and everybody has calmed down. Well into my second decade of practice, 8-year-old Delilah presented with a severe headache, complete loss of vision, and a grapefruit-sized tumor on the left side of her brain, taking up nearly half of that side of her head and pushing the normal brain down and over to the opposite side. As brain tumors go, it was large, and it was clearly causing a great deal of pressure on the surrounding tissue. Her acute blindness was a symptom of that. I decided to take the tumor out in an urgent 5-hour operation soon after she arrived. After clipping just enough of her black, beautifully braided hair to be able to sterilize the skin, we made a long S-shaped incision to expose the underlying bright white skull. Then we used a tiny drill to make small holes in the skull and connect them one by one to carefully remove a square window of bone overlying the tumor. The dura underneath was bulging from the underlying pressure, and when we opened it with a tiny pair of scissors, the tumor and surrounding brain immediately began to swell outside the opening, pushing out into the empty space. We quickly began to gut the inner part of the tumor, creating a cavity on the inside so that we could carefully dissect the outside edges away from the surrounding brain. Stay in the middle. I always hear the voice of Jerry Oakes, a past surgical mentor at this exact point. As the dissection plane between the tumor and the normal brain was developed, we placed tiny 2-millimeter thick cotton patties to help staunch the slow but steady venous ooze from the tumor. These cotton patties are absolute godsends for neurosurgeons, as we use them one by one to delineate normal from abnormal. We use so many of them during a single surgery, in fact, that there are tiny long blue strings that drape up and just over the edge of the craniotomy so that we can see them and don't leave one in inadvertently. The nurses and scrub techs meticulously count them at the end just to make sure. We do not want to leave something inside the head that we do not mean to. We brought in the operating microscope to help see as we separated the edges of the tumor from the normal surrounding brain. As we worked, I could see tiny thrombosed blood vessels and what looked like dead tumor in the core, indicating that the tumor was growing so fast it was outgrowing its own internal blood supply, a concerning sign of malignancy. We couldn't dwell on this, though. We were millimeters away from the motor strip. Time passed as the resident and I worked. As more and more tumor came out, the bleeding began to slow down, and the brain around the tumor began to relax. Once we had the last portion out, the brain had filled in at least half of the cavity already. Happy, I thought, to have the invader out. Then I remembered that we too were invaders, and we made our own way out, careful to repair each layer, dura, bone, skin, with each step. As Delilah woke up from anesthesia in the operating room, the scrub nurses carefully removed the instruments and tools from around her in order to clean and ready them for another day. She flickered her eyes open as the sedation gradually wore off. She reached up to shield her eyes from the bright lights of the OR. A good sign. We held our breath. Someone held up 2 fingers in front of her. She counted them both. But everyone guesses too, I thought. I held up first a pen. Pen, she said. Then object after object. Phone, thumb, watch, she said, naming them as I pulled all sorts of things out to show her. The anesthesiologist patted me on the shoulder and moved to inject just enough sedation for transport to the ICU. I think we've seen enough, Jay, she said, smiling. Let's get her upstairs. What do you think? I nodded. We were convinced. I was convinced. She could see. The scrub nurse looked up from her work counting the instruments before sending the trays out of the room. Hallelujah, she said. I went out to find her mother, Leslie, in the waiting room. She saw me the moment I came through the door, stepping away from her large family, anxious, her eyes searching my face for any sign of good news. I told her that the tumor was out, that Delilah had woken up neurologically intact, and that she could see. I held up my pen and thumb and watch as proof, telling her how she had named them and how the anesthesiologist had to finally call me off. Her mother reached out to touch the pen. She stared at it for a moment, her hand hanging there between us. Then she hugged me. After a few seconds, she turned to hug her family. They formed a circle and offered prayers for the news, and I joined them for a moment, hesitant to invade their sacred space with the knowledge I had in my brain. I remember Leslie standing across from me with her head bowed, a loving and calm force for her child, steeling herself to take on this next challenge in their life together. In my mind, as we stood there in prayer, all I could see were those tiny thrombosed blood vessels in the middle of the tumor, the necrotic part in the center. There I stood in the circle, holding hands with the family, eyes closed. I was not giving thanks for her recovered vision, but asking for a miracle that I was wrong and that the tumor was benign, not malignant. But I knew I was not. Nothing would change the fact that the frozen section of tumor sent to pathology from the OR was thought to be a glioblastoma multiforme, a GBM, a grade 4 out of 4 tumor, highly malignant and never fully curable. The average life expectancy for a child with that tumor type is 1 to 2 years, and its growth tends to be relentless once it recurs. The final pathologic diagnosis would not be back for a few days, and for the moment I had to separate the wake-up from surgery from my eventual duty to tell the parents the final pathologic diagnosis. But that moment was coming. By the second day after surgery, Delilah was sitting up in bed, cracking jokes with her family. The next day she had the nurses in our rounding team laughing at nearly her every word. She held on to a ukulele and threatened to play it unless we would do some task of her choosing, like change her lunch order to all ice cream or bring her comic books to read. Her resilience and remarkable spirit in the aftermath of such a profound surgery inspired all of us in our work.